Xin, 14th Lady is a unique and ethereal fox spirit character from Pu Songling's Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio. She possesses otherworldly qualities, encompassing the finest virtues of mortal women. Graceful and intelligent, well-versed in literature and reason, she is strong, kind-hearted, and remarkably wise. Despite being a fox spirit, her heart is filled with goodness. She resides in a temple with her fox father and 18 sisters, hence her name 14th Lady, as she's the 14th among her sisters. She is dedicated to doing good deeds, helping others, and pursuing the path of cultivation to become an immortal. Feng Sheng, from Guangping Prefecture, lived during the Ming Dynasty's Zheng era. In his youth, he was reckless and indulgent, frequently overindulging in alcohol. One morning, he happened upon a young girl wearing a red cloak and exuding beauty. She was accompanied by a young servant, traversing the morning dew-soaked path. Feng Sheng became enamored with her at first sight. In the evening, returning home in a drunken stupor, he encountered the same girl leaving a long-abandoned temple by the roadside. Curious about her presence in a temple, Feng Sheng tied his donkey outside and decided to investigate. Upon entering the temple, he found ruins and dilapidated walls, with a stone path adorned with lush grass resembling a green carpet. As he hesitated, a neatly dressed elder with white hair emerged and asked, "Where does the guest come from?" Feng Sheng replied, "I happened upon this ancient temple and wish to pay my respects." "How did you come to be here, sir?" The elder explained, "I've been wandering and found no place to stay. I've temporarily settled here with my family. Since you've honored us with your presence, let's share some tea." With that, he invited Feng Sheng inside. Inside the temple, Feng Sheng saw a courtyard beyond the hall, with a clean stone path and no wild plants. Entering the room, he was greeted by fragrant curtains and bedclothes. After both were seated, the elder introduced himself as Xin. Feng Sheng, somewhat intoxicated, impulsively asked, "I've heard you have a daughter, and she has yet to find a suitable husband. Though I may not be worthy, I'm willing to propose to your daughter." Xin smiled and said, "Let me discuss this with my wife." Feng Sheng requested writing tools and composed a poem, 1,000 gold to find a jade pestle. With diligent hands, I'll wield it myself. If Yunying is willing, she'll personally grind the mysterious frost. Xin read the poem, smiled, and handed it to a servant. After a while, a maid whispered to Xin, who then excused himself for a moment. When he returned, he engaged in light conversation, avoiding the topic of marriage. Unable to contain his curiosity, Feng Sheng inquired, "I'm still unsure of your intention. Please clarify to dispel my doubts." Xin replied, "You are an extraordinary individual, and I've admired you for a while. However, I have a private matter that I can't directly discuss." Feng Sheng persisted, and Xin explained, "I have 19 daughters, and 12 of them are already married. My wife decides their marriages. I don't interfere." Feng Sheng asserted, "I want the girl I saw this morning, the one traveling with a young servant." Xin remained silent, and they exchanged wordless glances. Meanwhile, delicate voices from inside the room could be faintly heard. Riding his drunkenness, Feng Sheng lifted the curtain and said, "Since we can't become husband and wife, I'll at least look upon your face to dispel my regrets." The occupants of the room were startled by the curtain's movement and stood in astonishment as they gazed at him. Feng Sheng spotted the same girl in the red attire, elegantly adorned, adjusting her belt with a poised stance. Seeing Feng Sheng intrude, panic spread among the room's occupants. Enraged, Xin ordered a few people to drag Feng Sheng out. Overcome by alcohol, Feng Sheng collapsed into a tangle of grass, with bits of tiles and stones raining down around him. Fortunately, none struck him. After lying down for a while, Feng Sheng heard the donkey grazing by the roadside. He got up, mounted the donkey unsteadily, and stumbled onto the road. Lost in the dim night, he accidentally wandered into a valley, where howls of wolves and screeches of owls sent shivers down his spine. Hesitatingly, he looked around, clueless about his location. He spotted faint lights within a dense grove of black trees in the distance, assuming it to be a village. Urging his donkey forward, he reached the spot. Looking up, he realized it was a grand entrance gate and used his whip to knock. A voice from inside asked, "Who is it, arriving here in the middle of the night?" Feng Sheng replied, "I got lost." The person inside said, "Wait, I'll inform the master." Feng Sheng craned his neck, waiting patiently. He heard the sound of a door latch being drawn, and a strong servant emerged, ready to lead his donkey. Entering, Feng Sheng found the surroundings splendid, with bright lights in the hall. After a brief seat, a woman came out and inquired about his name. Feng Sheng introduced himself. After a while, a few maids assisted an elderly lady to come out, saying, "The Marquis is here." Feng Sheng stood up, intending to bow respectfully, but the old lady stopped him and asked him to sit down. She said, "Are you the grandson of Feng Yanzi?" Feng Sheng replied, "Yes." The old lady continued, "You're my grandnephew. I'm old and frail, and it's been a while since we've interacted as family." Feng Sheng said, "My father died when I was young. And among those who associated with my grandfather, I can hardly recognize 1 out of 10. I've never met you before, so please guide me on how to address you." The old lady responded, "You'll figure it out yourself." Feng Sheng didn't dare ask further, sitting there deep in thought. The old lady asked, "How did my grandnephew end up here so late at night?" Feng Sheng, often boasting of his bravery, recounted his experiences in detail. The old lady chuckled and said, "This is a good thing. Besides, my grandnephew is a scholar and won't tarnish their family. How could a wild fox spirit be so arrogant? Don't worry, I can make this happen for you." Feng Sheng expressed his gratitude repeatedly. The old lady, looking at the attendants on either side, remarked, "I didn't know that Xin's daughters were so dignified and beautiful." A maid added, "He has 19 daughters, all of them graceful and elegant. Do you know which one the gentleman is proposing to?" Feng Sheng replied, "She's around 15 years old." The maid said, "That's 14th Lady. In March, she and her mother came to celebrate the Marquis's birthday. How could the Marquis forget?" The old lady laughed, and said, "The one who wears high-bottomed shoes with lotus petal engravings, and fills them with incense shavings, and walks with a veil over her face?" The maid confirmed it, and the old lady added, "She's quite good at putting on a show, playing coy. But she's indeed charming, and my grandnephew has good taste." Then, she instructed the maid, "Send a young maid to fetch her." After a while, the maid returned and reported, "Xin family's 14th lady is here." Following that, a woman dressed in red appeared, bowing to the old lady. The old lady helped her stand, and said, "From now on, you'll be my grandnephew's wife. There's no need for girlish manners." The woman stood up gracefully, her red sleeves draped delicately. The old lady adjusted her hair and earrings, and asked, "What have you been doing recently in the inner chambers?" The woman answered softly, "I've been embroidering flowers when I'm free." Turning her head, she saw Feng Sheng and blushed, feeling shy and uneasy. The old lady said, "This is my grandnephew. He's determined to marry you. How did you let him get lost and wander through the valley all night?" The woman lowered her head, remaining silent. The old lady continued, "I called you here for no other reason but to make you the matchmaker for my grandnephew." The woman still didn't utter a word. The old lady ordered a maid to prepare the beddings, arranging for the two of them to be wed. The woman blushed and said, "I need to inform my parents." The old lady said, "I'm arranging this with the Marquis's command. How can your parents object? But if you're concerned, I won't force you. Even if I die, I won't command you." The old lady laughed, and said, "You young lady, are spirited and unyielding, not bowing to power. You are indeed my grandnephew's wife." With that, she plucked a golden flower from the woman's hair and handed it to Feng Sheng, instructing him to consult an almanac and choose an auspicious day. She then had a maid escort 14th Lady back. At this moment, the rooster crowed, and the old lady had someone lead Feng Sheng out while holding the donkey. Feng Sheng walked a few steps out and turned back to look, only to find that the houses and village had vanished completely, replaced by a dense pine forest and a few graves covered with overgrown weeds. He gathered his thoughts and realized that he was at Zhu's tomb. Zhu was his grandmother's younger brother, which was why the old lady referred to him as her grandnephew. Feng Sheng understood that he had encountered a ghost, but he still didn't know who 14th Lady really was. He returned home, sighed, and carelessly checked a date to wait for, feeling unsure about relying on ghostly appointments. He visited the temple again, but it was desolate, with no signs of life. Local people mentioned that foxes were often seen in the temple. Feng Sheng thought to himself, as long as he obtained the beautiful woman, even if she was a fox, it was fine. On the chosen day, Feng Sheng tidied his room, cleaned the path, and had servants take turns watching outside the door. Midnight came and went without any activity. He was growing hopeless. Suddenly, noise outside caught his attention. Feng Sheng hurriedly put on his shoes and ran outside to see that the bridal sedan was already in the courtyard. A maid was assisting 14th Lady as she sat inside. There was hardly any dowry. Only two long-bearded servants carried a large money jar over their shoulders, setting it down in a corner of the room. Feng Sheng was happy to have married a beautiful wife and had no doubts about her being different. He asked 14th Lady, with a dead ghost like that, how could your family be so submissive to her? 14th Lady replied, Zhu has become the envoy of the 5 capital circuit and commands ghosts and foxes within several hundred miles. He rarely returns home. Feng Sheng didn't forget about the old lady acting as the matchmaker. The next day, he went to her grave to offer a sacrifice. When he returned, 2 maids came bearing a gift of brocade with shell patterns. As congratulations, placing it on the table and leaving. Feng Sheng told 14th Lady, who glanced at it and said, This is from the Marquis. There was a young nobleman named Chu Yintai in the same county as Feng Sheng. They had been classmates since childhood and were quite close. Hearing that Feng Sheng had married a fox woman, Chu Yintai brought a gift on the 3rd day of their wedding and personally came to celebrate. A few days later, Chu Yintai sent an invitation for Feng Sheng to attend a banquet. When 14th Lady learned of it, she told Feng Sheng, last time he came, I saw his sinister eyes and eagle-like nose through the cracks in the wall. This person is not one to keep as a friend. It's better not to go, Feng Sheng agreed. The next day, Chu Yintai visited to question why Feng Sheng hadn't fulfilled their agreement and presented his newly composed poems. When Feng Sheng commented on the poems, including some mocking remarks, Chu Yintai felt embarrassed. They parted unhappily. Back in his room, Feng Sheng laughed as he recounted the incident to 14th Lady. Sadly, she said, Chu Yintai is like a wild wolf. You can't joke with him. If you don't listen to me, you'll face great calamity. Feng Sheng acknowledged his mistake with a smile. Afterward, he and Chu Yintai continued to joke and tease each other, and the initial discord gradually faded. Just as the imperial examiner's term ended, Chu Yintai ranked first in the exams, while Feng Sheng came in second. Chu Yintai, proud of his achievement, sent servants to invite Feng Sheng for a drink. Feng Sheng declined the offer multiple times before finally agreeing to go. Upon arriving, he realized it was Chu Yintai's birthday that day. The room was filled with guests, and the feast was lavish. Chu Yintai showed his test paper to Feng Sheng, and everyone gathered around to admire it with praises. After a few rounds of drinks, a musical band below began to play, creating a lively atmosphere. Suddenly, Chu Yintai turned to Feng Sheng and said, There's a saying, in the arena, refrain from discussing literature. I now realize the error in this saying. The reason I ranked ahead of you is simply because the beginning of my essay was slightly superior. The guests all joined in praising Chu Yintai's statement. Still slightly intoxicated, Feng Sheng couldn't hold back and burst into laughter, saying, Do you still think you ranked first based on your essay? Before anyone could react, Chu Yintai's face turned pale. He was embarrassed and angry, unable to respond. Seeing the situation, the guests gradually dispersed, and Feng Sheng quietly slipped away. Once sober, Feng Sheng regretted his words and recounted the story to 14th Lady. Displeased, she said, You truly are a frivolous country bumpkin. Treating gentlemen with frivolity leads to moral decline, and treating the wicked that way leads to fatal danger. Calamity is approaching for you. I can't bear to see you fall. Let's part ways. Feng Sheng was frightened and tearfully expressed his regret. 14th Lady said, If you want me to stay, we must make An agreement: from now on, you will stay indoors, cut off social ties, and refrain from excessive drinking. Feng Sheng respectfully agreed. 14th Lady was diligent, frugal, and efficient. She spun thread and wove cloth every day. She often visited her natal family, but never spent the night there. She also engaged in trading precious metals and fabrics, investing any profits into the money jar. She kept her doors locked and refused visitors with the help of her servants. One day, Chu Yintai sent another letter inviting Feng Sheng. However, 14th Lady burned the letter, ensuring that Feng Sheng remained unaware. The next day, while Feng Sheng was attending a funeral in the city, he met Chu Yintai at the mourning family's house. Chu Yintai grabbed his arm and earnestly invited him. Feng Sheng declined on a pretext, but Chu Yintai had his groom hold Feng Sheng's horse, insisting he come along. Once at Chu Yintai's house, a feast was immediately prepared. Feng Sheng once again tried to excuse himself, claiming he had matters to attend to and needed to return early. Chu Yintai persisted in keeping him, instructing his maids to play music. Feng Sheng, who had been feeling restless due to his recent confinement, seized this opportunity for a spirited drink. Ignoring all caution, he indulged himself in drinking excessively, eventually becoming so intoxicated that he collapsed onto the table in a deep slumber. Chu Yintai's wife, Ruanqi, was known for her fierceness and jealousy. Her servants dared not beautify themselves. A few days prior, a maid had entered Chu Yintai's study and been caught by Ruanqi. In a fit of rage, Ruanqi used a wooden rod to strike the maid's head, causing her skull to split open, leading to her immediate death. Chu Yintai had harbored resentment towards Feng Sheng since the incident where he had been publicly humiliated. He had been plotting revenge ever since, and now saw a chance to take advantage of Feng Sheng's intoxication to accuse him of murder. While Feng Sheng was unconscious, Chu Yintai carried the maid's body onto the bed, closed the door, and left. Feng Sheng woke up in the early hours, his hangover subsiding, and found himself lying on the table. Searching for a pillow in bed, he stumbled over something smooth and slippery. He reached down to feel it, only to realize it was a person. Assuming it was a servant sent by the host to accompany him, Feng Sheng kicked the person lightly with his foot. However, the person remained motionless, resembling a lifeless corpse. Filled with terror, Feng Sheng ran out of the room, shouting loudly. The servants of Chu's household were awakened, and upon lighting a lamp, they discovered the lifeless body. Furious, they grabbed Feng Sheng and began to berate him. Chu Yintai came out to inspect the scene, falsely accusing Feng Sheng of attempting to rape the maid and then killing her. They tied him up and took him to the Guangping prefectural government. The following day, 14th Lady learned of the incident. Tears welled up in her eyes as she said, "I knew this day would come." She began sending money daily to Feng Sheng to cover his expenses. Feng Sheng's encounter with the local authorities proved unfruitful, and he was subjected to harsh interrogation and torture, leaving his skin torn and his flesh ripped. 14th Lady personally went to inquire about his ordeal. When Feng Sheng saw her, he was overwhelmed with grief and anger, rendering him speechless. Recognizing the depth of the predicament, 14th Lady advised Feng Sheng to confess, in order to avoid further punishment. Sobbing, Feng Sheng agreed. During her visits, others couldn't see 14th Lady. When she returned home, she sighed deeply. One day, her fox servant girl returned. Anxious, 14th Lady called her over to a secluded spot, and they spoke in hushed tones. After the conversation, 14th Lady emerged with a radiant smile, attending to her household chores as usual. The next day, Feng Sheng's servant visited him in prison. Feng Sheng asked him to deliver a message to 14th Lady, requesting her presence to bid him farewell for the last time. 14th Lady casually agreed, seemingly indifferent to the matter. Rumors spread among the household, criticizing her for being so heartless. Suddenly, word circulated that Chu Yintai had been dismissed from his position, and that the emperor himself ordered a re-examination of Feng Sheng's case. The servant heard this news and eagerly shared it with 14th Lady. She was also delighted and sent the servant to the government office to gather information. Upon arriving, the servant discovered that Feng Sheng had been released and was waiting to meet him. Tears and joy mixed as they embraced each other. Shortly after, Chu Yintai was arrested, and a magistrate investigated the case. The truth was unveiled, and Feng Sheng was immediately released. He returned home to find 14th Lady, and they couldn't help but shed tears of both sorrow and relief. Once the sorrow subsided, happiness returned, but Feng Sheng remained puzzled about how the emperor had learned about his case. 14th Lady pointed at the servant girl and said, "This is your benefactor." Astonished, Feng Sheng asked for an explanation. It turned out that 14th Lady had sent the servant girl to the capital to seek justice and appeal for Feng Sheng's case. However, upon reaching the palace, the servant girl encountered divine guardians and hesitated. After months of unsuccessful attempts, she decided to follow the emperor who was heading to Dadong. Posing as a prostitute, the servant girl caught the emperor's attention during his visit to a brothel. The emperor showed her favor and asked if she had any grievances. The servant girl replied, "I am the daughter of an examiner named Feng in Guangping Prefecture. My father was wrongfully accused and is facing execution. As a result, he sold me to this brothel." Touched by her story, the emperor granted her 100 taels of silver. Before leaving, the servant girl provided more details about the case, which the emperor recorded on paper along with her name. The emperor promised to share his wealth and prosperity with her. The servant girl wished for nothing more than to be reunited with her father, rejecting a life of luxury. The emperor agreed and departed. The servant girl recounted the events to Feng Sheng, who was overwhelmed with gratitude. Not long after, 14th Lady suddenly said to Feng Sheng, "If it weren't for our emotional connection, where would these troubles come from? When you were imprisoned, I sought help from our relatives, but no one was willing to help. The bitterness of that time was truly indescribable. Now, I increasingly find this mundane world tiresome and distressing. I have found a woman for you. Let us part ways from now on." Upon hearing this, Feng Sheng cried and knelt on the ground, and only then did 14th Lady relent. By nightfall, 14th Lady had lured sleep with Feng Sheng, but he rejected her advances. The next morning, 14th Lady appeared diminished in appearance. Over the next month, her beauty waned further. Within 6 months, she had become haggard and ugly, resembling a village woman. Nonetheless, Feng Sheng continued to treat her with the same respect, unchanged. 14th Lady suddenly announced her intention to say goodbye again, stating, "You already have a beautiful wife. Why would you need an old and ugly woman like me?" Feng Sheng cried and pleaded with her as he had done before. After another month, 14th Lady fell seriously ill, refusing to eat or drink. She lay exhausted in bed. Feng Sheng cared for her, tending to her like one would their parents. Despite efforts from shamans and doctors, her condition worsened, and 14th Lady eventually passed away. Devastated, Feng Sheng used the 100 taels of silver the emperor had gifted the servant girl to bury 14th Lady. A few days later, the fox servant girl also disappeared. Feng Sheng then married Luer as his second wife, and within a year, they had a son. However, consecutive years of poor harvests led to financial difficulties. The couple faced growing hardship and shared their worries. Feng Sheng suddenly remembered the money jar in the corner of the house. He had often seen 14th Lady depositing money into it, but he didn't know if it was still there. Upon inspection, he found the place filled with bowls of soybeans and salt containers. Clearing these items aside, he discovered the money jar intact. When he poked it with chopsticks, he found it so solid that the chopsticks couldn't penetrate it. He shattered the jar, and a stream of money poured out. From that moment, Feng Sheng became suddenly prosperous. Later, Feng Sheng's servant visited Mount Tahua and encountered 14th Lady, who was riding a green mule, with her servant girl riding a donkey behind her. Upon seeing the servant, 14th Lady asked, "Is Fengling safe?" She added, "Tell your master that I've become a celestial being." After speaking, she vanished. It is said that 14th Lady, beautiful and graceful, resembled a celestial being who had transcended earthly concerns. Despite being a fox demon, her heart was kind. She resided with her fox father and 18 sisters in a dilapidated temple on the outskirts, aspiring to achieve enlightenment. She was known as 14th Lady because she was the 14th sibling. Unlike her selfish sisters who absorbed human vitality to enhance their powers, she was dedicated to performing good deeds and accumulating virtue, seeking to assist and uplift others while pursuing spiritual transcendence. 14th Lady saw her sisters trying to seduce righteous men like Feng Sheng. When their schemes threatened to drain his vital essence, she intervened to save him. Despite ruining her sisters' plans and defying them, she rescued Feng Sheng and kindled a deep bond between them. Feng Sheng, moved by her beauty and kindness, admired her wholeheartedly and fell in love with her. Feng Sheng didn't mind 14th Lady's fox demon identity. With the help of his aunt, they eventually married. Although 14th Lady had once aspired to become an immortal, her love for Feng Sheng caused her to abandon that path. Instead, she chose to embrace their love and the mortal world. Meanwhile, the cunning and ruthless Chu Yintai sought greater power through dark magic. He transformed into a demonic creature, harboring ambitions of dominance. He harmed innocent people and even killed many of the Fox sisters. In her pursuit of justice and revenge, 14th Lady resolved to eliminate Chu Yintai, even if it meant sacrificing her own life and love. Overcoming numerous challenges, Feng Sheng and 14th Lady's love deepened. However, faced with larger moral dilemmas, and understanding 14th Lady's determination to eradicate evil and protect peace, Feng Sheng suppressed his personal desires and supported his beloved wife. 14th Lady eventually vanquished evil and confronted Chu Yintai in his demonic form. They perished together, with 14th Lady sacrificing her life for the greater good. Feng Sheng was devastated by the loss of his beloved, yet he took pride in her selfless sacrifice and respected her noble deeds. 14th Lady's virtuous actions touched heaven and earth, and she finally achieved enlightenment.